In this video, I want to talk about what I think is the most exciting and sophisticated element of the CSM data system. The school climate and school leadership are focused on surveying, getting data in, and they're not radically different from other tools that are out there. The main power of them is in the flexibility and the integration and the ability to pull the data together from all of those different places. But the teacher practice suite in and of itself is quite sophisticated and comprehensive. Of the 30 or so instruments in the entire data system, 15 reside within the teacher practice suite. And so they are combined together in ways that all of the other tools are not. So there's an interplay in all of these elements in the teacher practice suite that provide administrators with incredibly robust, powerful, and valid data set from which they can make professional judgments. And so, as I've talked about in another video, this is not about evaluation, though it will help do that well at the end of the year or whenever it needs to be done. But it is about formative assessment, is about coaching teachers, helping teachers to be the best teachers they can be. The research says that's the most important thing we can do for kids in a school is to make sure we have the best teachers, and those teachers are becoming better and better day by day by day. So there are a couple of things that need to happen in our thinking before we can move into embracing an approach that's this sophisticated and yet this powerful and frankly, this easy to use. Number one is we need to get away from the idea that we can evaluate a teacher by walking into the classroom and observing. You can assess some things. You can gather some data that way, but it is a very incomplete and erratic approach. You need to have multiple observations and approach them in different ways in order to get a good set of data that's reasonably reliable. Even the very best and most expensive systems out there typically don't do a good job. Many of them are too big. They have so many questions, so many things to evaluate. It's very difficult for any administrator to stay on top of it and do a good job. They also are largely evaluative. This teacher is improving. This teacher is competent. This teacher is proficient. And having to make these micro granular judgments in the process as you're observing what is both science and art happening in real time in front of you is exceptionally difficult. In fact, we find out that observers don't do a very good job. And one observer will come up with different responses and assessments than another one looking at the same input. So it's exceptionally difficult to do this well. And again, as I say, it restricts it to one approach, which is the administrator observing classroom behaviors. That's not enough. What we know from the research is that you need multiple points of input in order to do a good job of identifying those teachers who are going to be and are most effective. So moving from observations, what else do we have? Well, number one, there is an administrator professionalism assessment that's accompanied by a teacher self-assessment. And this gives them an opportunity to talk about things outside of the classroom, which is a big part of a teacher's role. How do they work with other teachers? How do they communicate with parents? Are they completing the tasks assigned to them? Are they showing up on time, appropriately addressed? And are they meeting their certification requirements? All those, what we would call professionalism. That's not an in-class observation. That's separate. So it's a separate instrument. And allowing the teacher to do some self-assessment and reflection about that adds power to it. And that leads to conversation where we talk about what needs to change, if anything, how are we doing? Yay, if we're doing well. The second piece of data that we look at is artifact review. And so that is the lesson planning, the curriculum units, the curriculum alignment, the assessments, projects, tests, quizzes, the kinds of thinking activities that are being done in the classroom and being planned for that you don't necessarily observe in any given observation context. So you need to look at the artifacts, the stuff that teachers are creating behind the scenes. They spend a lot of time and effort working on, and talk with teachers about that. What do you see there? Okay. Now, this is still administrator judgment, administrator reviewing the scene and making some judgments coupled with observations. That doesn't even count as a second point. That's all part of this first input source, okay, which is the observer, the administrator, just doing a thorough job of gathering data that they can see. Now, there are two other points. One is value added. So this is the idea that what we need to be doing and understand about teachers is what are students actually learning? So from the fall to the spring, are students actually growing and learning? And why wouldn't we include that kind of data? It's an external measure, it's an output measure rather than an input, rather than looking at what you are producing here in the classroom, your behaviors, and what you've written down in your plans. Now we're looking at the learning that actually happened, and that's what schools are all about. It's not about teaching, it's about learning. And so one of the things we have are standardized tests to look at that. And so for a limited group of teachers, only those from second grade through eighth grade who specifically teach reading or math, we would include a value added over time score, some sort of way of weighting what is it that kids are learning when they're in your classroom. Are they growing a full year's gain in understanding and skill development? Less than a full year, more than a full year? That's important information. And we include that in, and it's combined with the other data in a fairly sophisticated manner to help us to get a very robust assessment. The third input point is also external to the administrator and the teacher, and that's the student voice and the parent voice. Students, we poll, we survey about individual teachers, and that's from students from fourth grade to 12th grade. Now, this is the part that's a philosophic lift. It's a psychological lift for administrators and teachers to get over. The irony is that student evaluation of teachers and professors at the university level is used all of the time, but it's not reliable. If you give a student a bad grade, you're going to be a bad professor. That's how that works at the post-secondary level. But in K-12, the student perspective, if the questions are good and are pertinent to what a student can actually see and experience, is exceptionally valid, exceptionally reliable, and one of the very best. In fact, the strongest predictor of effective teaching is what the kids say. That is your best tool. So if you weren't going to do anything else, use any of the other 15 tools in the teacher practice suite and just pick this one, that would be the one to do. And I know that's hard to get over. People have to think that through. And yet that is what the research says, okay? That is a very valid, very reliable tool. It takes at least four and perhaps more formal observations from an administrator to develop a robust enough data set to compete with that. Competing with 15 to 25 students who live with that teacher day in and day out over weeks and weeks and weeks, it's very hard to compete. Now, there are things that the administrator can do. We don't get students to evaluate professionalism and curriculum alignment, those kinds of things. But kids have a very definite perspective about the behaviors in the classroom and whether the teacher manages the class well, returns assignments on time, explains things that they understand, gives them the help they need. So many things. That's all in the student voice survey. Now, for K to 3, we survey parents. It's a somewhat more limited question set, maybe about half as many questions, a little bit narrower domain, because parents don't have nearly the same experience in the classroom that students do, yet they do have a pretty good sense from their own children as to what's happening in the classroom. And we combine that with a K-3 survey of students using a frowny face, neutral face, and happy face emojis, just to get some data from the kids. Kids have opinions, kids have viewpoints, and they're important. And when they are aggregated together, are surprisingly valid and reliable. It's really amazing. That's what the research tells us. So we have included that within the teacher practice suite. And then we have the observations, and there are a total of 7 different observation tools that we look at, and we combine these together, and they're aggregated in such a way that depending on what you do, things will balance out. So if you do more observations, observations will carry more weight. If you don't, then the student voice will carry more weight. We also allow administrators to make some judgments as to how much weight should these carry within the overall framework which we have developed and we believe is defensible. So, for example, in the area of professionalism, administrators can weight it between 10 and 20% of the final evaluation. For instructional design, it's the same. For value added, and we use the MAP continuous growth percentile for that score. We give a range of 15 to 25% because for that particular external measure, that's a more appropriate weight. So we're going to get into the details of each of the elements in the teacher practice suite in the next few videos, but I wanted to explain the background, the principles undergirding the development of this suite. You don't have to buy the other two suites to use this, but because of the kinds of questions and the way they're designed, which are focusing on behaviors in the classroom that you can observe, and framed within a 2 or 3 part scale. So instead of uh, a 5 part scale where you're trying to distinguish between very fine granular differences, we use either in a short form observation, the behavior is evident or it's not evident. And there's a place for comments. You have to defend what it is you're seeing. You're looking for things and you see them or you don't. In a longer period, then there's 3. It's not evident, it's partially evident, or clearly evident. And again, defending what you see in terms of behaviors that the teacher is exhibiting or students are exhibiting, because part of this involves a walk around in the classroom, asking questions of students to see what they're actually learning. Are they aware that the objectives that might be posted on the whiteboard um, are actually getting into the students' minds? Do they know what the objective for the lesson is? Those kinds of things. So um, when we put all of this together, it is aggregated together in a way that will come up with a data set, a composite score at the end of the day that administrators can use to help them in their evaluation. Again, we don't know what a good score is or a bad score. We can't do that. But where you have a teacher that you think is worthy of moving into a leadership role, you have a sense that this is a master teacher. Do your kids agree? Do the students agree? Do the VAT scores support that as well? These 3 parts of the 3-legged stool are really important. Then you have a defensible way to make a judgment. Or you're really wondering whether you can continue to hire a teacher at the end of the day, end of the year. And so this data can help you make a decision and confirm. And again, a lot of it's based on your own professional judgments, but you're now including with what are students saying? What are parents saying? What is the growth of these students? What do we know from the continuous growth percentile? You pull all of that together and you can make a professional judgment based on accurate information. And that's what the CSM data system and the teacher practice suite is all about, giving you accurate, reliable information so you can make a professional judgment that's not just subjective, but based on really valid and reliable criteria. We'll get into each element of the teacher practice suite in other videos.